So tell me a little bit about Plastic Bank.
Well, Scott, the Plastic Bank is really kind of like a currency exchange. It is an opportunity for the world to deposit materials and withdraw either cash or buy the things that they need the most, whether it be school tuition, medical care, Wi-Fi, training, and everything else. We're exemplified more of like a global chain of stores. Deposit plastic garbage to pay for the things that you or your children need the most.
Okay.
Right.
And so how does that build into sort of the economic vitality of a community?
There's I use came from a parable, but we'll use a metaphor of fields of diamonds. If you're walking over a field of diamonds, but realize that there's no way that you can deposit the value of the diamonds to a bank account or spend the value of the diamonds, you're going to keep them on the ground like rocks. And so our sheer presence in communities reveals the inherent value in that petroleum resource and multiplies the value, because now you actually may have access to education. So it may not just be the value of the plastic itself, but what it gives you access to. And so it multiplies the value perception of the material. And that is a profound shift in communities.
Yeah, very interesting. So one of the things I'm working on is how do we identify illegal one of the things I'm working on is how do we identify illegal fishing by looking at satellite imagery and tracking the behavior of boats. Because given their particular pattern, we can determine if they're fishing, if they're just carrying cargo, where they're fishing, the patterns is what type of fishing they're doing. By the time of day, we can understand what type of fish that they are harvesting and make sure that that is what they're permitted for. And so what we're really trying to do is how do we eliminate the illegal fishing so we can restore abundance to the fisheries and be able to make sure that the people who rely on fishing for their income, 12% of the world's population somehow relies on the fishing trade. So how do we make sure that they are economically viable and remove some of the illegal fishing?
So now 12% of the population relies on fishing as an income, but how much of the world is relying on fishing as a protein source?
Yeah, so it's about a third of the population, up to 40% of the world's primary protein source is fish. Right. And so as we slowly deplete that stock, it does become a food security issue, and particularly that it's being depleted in areas that have the least options around food. So it's really part of how do we help stabilize that environment. What brings you here? What brings you here? Sustainable Oceans.
Well, Sustainable Oceans, of course, now our whole initiative is to truly turn the tap off, and we know that when we can end some of the conditions of poverty, we use that plastic as money for the world, to reveal them as diamonds. That's what keeps them from being burned into piles or thrown in the canals and the rivers. That's really a root cause that prohibits the flow of entering material into the ocean. And through our course of the last few years, we've collected a few billion bottles already, and we affect tens of thousands of people. So we're making some significant progress. And in that, we've put legions of people through school and into vocational training and all kinds of things. So we see the power, the economic engine in it. Now, the material we collect, we sell to big brands like S.C. Johnson and Henkel and others that then use it back into the circular economy. So we're connecting the whole world and ending poverty. Now, tell me more about AI. Tell me about why is this an initiative for Microsoft?
Well, for us, what we're trying to do is how do we take what we're learning around AI and apply that to global issues, because we think that there's challenges that are beyond, they're so complicated, we're not going to be able to solve them in our current tool set. So sustainability, health, poverty, these are things that we've struggled with for decades, and they're just getting more complex, and we think that we can bring the computational power of AI to solve some of those problems. So, how do we better understand biodiversity? How do we better understand the complex interactions of health? How do we understand how can we remove carbon from the atmosphere? Those are things that we think we can apply AI to, and what we think about, and I love about what you're doing, is not only how do we bring computational power to that, but how do we offset some of the negative impacts that we and our industry is having. So we do a lot of that already around carbon credits, and what I love about Plastic Bank is that allows us to do the same thing around plastic. So not only does it allow economic vitality of communities, not only does it provide a market to get plastic back into materials, but for people who, the industry that plastic is actually important for, how do they offset the negative impacts of that and really drive a much more holistic economy?
And I think the conversation here as well, when you're trying to use technology for a force of good for the world, it's really about repairing the world. And I think the conversation has to transcend offsetting or neutrality. I think we're way past that. We really have to enter the regeneration economy, and that's what's unfolding today. We need to be in a place where we're repairing the damage that's been done over the years. It's not enough to stop doing damage. So sustainability, we got to change the words in that.
Yeah, I agree that we have these assets, and instead of slowing the depletion, we really need to think about how do we start reproducing them.
How do we reproduce it? And that I think is what you're conversing here today. Is about how do we repair fish stocks around the world? How do we continue to create prosperity for the world, abundance for the world, and put technology to work where it's supposed to work. Talk about Microsoft and where does this come from in the program or within the organization? Is this a root of the philosophy of the company?
Yeah, so we have always been looking. We're tech optimists. We believe that technology can benefit society. There are some certainly negative effects of it, and what we want to make sure is that we make sure as our industry creates all this growth, all this abundance, that we make sure that everyone can partake in that. And right now, the rewards have not been evenly distributed. So we're actively looking for how do we make sure that we maintain society's trust, that we are seen as a positive actor helping all people as opposed to just the handful of elites.
Well, we would argue as well that it's not really just for society, it's for ourselves. We know that that's what needs to be happening. So sometimes there's a perception, but I think that the organization itself is really stepping forward from an employee base as well and a management base, knowing that the world has to be repaired and stewarded. Nothing to be ashamed of there, of course. Whether people see it or not, we're going to show up authentically and do the right thing. And talk about employees, talk about how they're engaged, talk about how you might see that in the company. Are new employees focused on working for projects that solve the challenges of the world? Yeah,
we see that it's a generational shift in that younger employees, more early in career, want to work at companies that align with their mission, and also consumers do too. So being able to make sure that our brand is aligned with that mission and that we authentically engage around that is important to us. And we see employee volunteerism, we see employee giving significantly across the world. The company does, 80 some odd % of our employees are part of our matching program. Up to $15,000 that we can match every year.
So
in the US.
every employee has the opportunity to donate $15,000, and Microsoft will match up to $15,000. It's remarkable. Any idea on how much that was last year?
Hundreds of millions in the US.
Hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Engaging a motivated workforce. I think it speaks of Microsoft and the staff themselves trying to be a force of change for the world. Not something that the world doesn't hear or know.
All up, we do about $1.7 billion of philanthropy every year. $1 billion in the U.S., about $700 million internationally. And
set aside what's occurred from the founder and all the rest of it.
That's Microsoft operating outside of the Gates Foundation.
Powerful.
Right.
So and yourself, and why are you passionate? Why are you involved in this project?
What I think is that it's an opportunity to find ways of harnessing tech that aligns directly with societal needs. How do we make sure that we are able to harness all the intellectual power of people working in AI and redirect them over to more societal impact. I'd love to hear from you what some of the key learnings, or what was the most interesting thing about sustainable brands for you? Let me get the name right. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience here at the conference, and what was the most interesting takeaway from you from Sustainable Oceans?
It's not the takeaway. Often it's the give.
Okay.
And often it's about having a tribe of people who are focused in solution. And there is a energy that surrounds people who are like-minded. And there is a collaboration that occurs. And often when there's a new way of thinking, that will go home with that person. They become different. And I think that Sustainable Oceans provides a way for people to think differently. And when there are solutions or challenges that were not yet posed, they may be in the creativity of the solution itself. So certainly there's learning. Certainly there's opportunity to meet people. And I think for the entirety of the audience, it's a new way to think. and it's a new way to be.
Yeah, I think that's been my experience here too. The quality of the folks here, the exhibitors, the talks, a really different mindset that people have brought here. And I hadn't heard about Plastic Bank before. That was a great learning for me, and several other folks around that. I think the people that have been convened together have really brought a much more holistic view to the question of sustainability. The question of recreating abundance has been a spectacular learning.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you too.